Uh, I spent 36 years working with our speaker, but I've never had the chance to introduce him before. Let me interject here a moment. When Charley gets through, we'll have some Q&A time, and then there's a few little nibbles afterwards. So I'm calling him, so you can do that and get through. I've never had a chance to introduce McDowell before. I've known him for a long time, as I say, 36 years. We worked together. I remember the first time I ever dealt with any McDowell copy, Times-Dispatch. He was covering a meeting of feuding Democrats. Nothing new, see. I broke a rule for copy editors and put this clever phrase into the head. He was writing about fractional factions or factional fractions. So I broke the rule and took his clever phrase and put it in the headline, and he didn't complain. In only one way can I tell that he's changed in all that time in preparation for a story or a column. No longer does he grind out cigarettes that he chain smokes onto a cement floor. He uses an ashtray. He still rewrites his leads several times. He still paces. He still does what the greatest sports writer of all, Red Smith, described. He writes, and the words come out just as little drops of blood. In the long run, Charley does what Eric Smith of the Cincinnati Reds does now, or in our time, what Joe DiMaggio or Willie Mays did, catching fly balls in center field. He makes it difficult to look easy. I give you Charles McDowell of the Times-Dispatch and Washington Weekly Review.
Thank you, Earl. Where is that thing's range? Can you hear me in the back? I get way back here. We all right? Wave your arms. It's bad. I'll start by thanking Earl for a whole lot of years of reading my copy and treating it well, and I'll thank him for giving me a route into town today. It suddenly turned a pleasant trip into a sort of sentimental moment. I came around Parham or Parham Road, I don't know which, because it didn't really exist in its present form when I went. I see people here I know all of a sudden. Whatever Parham or Parham Road is, I came around it and I got lost. The city has exploded. And found myself at the head of Academy Road off Bridge, where I lived for a good many years. And then, to my surprise, found myself shortly off Sinton Road, where I also lived before I moved. And then found myself at a corner which used to have Ray Shadwell's drugstore. And it now has some vast thing that I couldn't understand at all. And all of which is just a way of saying that it made me count some years. And I'm probably at tonight or tomorrow or something, 25th anniversary of leaving Richmond to go to Washington, D.C. Now that's ridiculous. Seems about 3 or 4 years. I congratulate all of you for working and for caring about a library. That goes without saying much too often, but I think libraries are about the last stand in this age. I hope you'll just stand with them. The price of your good work is to come to meetings like this and be lectured at by people from Washington, always Washington. I don't know why. I said I came in my car. I didn't say, but I came in my car, which is the way I get around in the world. But before I get to this speech, which I'm trying to put off, I recently had 2 experiences with limousines. Network television people live in limousines. PBS part-time television people do not have very many experiences with limousines. I have had 2 in very recent times. I had a speech at a forum in Western New Jersey, and I had forgotten there was a Western New Jersey, but there is, and it's beautiful. It's like the top of the Shenandoah Valley, way up there, lovely. I was picked up at the Newark airport by the limousine. It wasn't just a limousine, it was a stretched out, incredibly long limousine. And it was white, and it had silver stuff all over it. And it But it was a remarkable treat to sit in the back of that thing, and there was a guy so far away that I talked into a little thing, and the driver talked back to me. And so we're riding along, and I said, how long will it take? And he said it'd take about 50 minutes. And I'd been on this airplane, and I'd gotten up early in Washington. And I said, what would we do for a cup of coffee? He said, it will be hard. And I said, well, I really need a cup of coffee. He said, well, there's a place, and in the rearview mirror, I could see him grimace. There wasn't much on this big highway, but we pulled off at a place that was a tumble-down roadside inn. And it had one big glaring plate glass window. And as we pulled into a parking lot that had never had a limousine in its entire history, I could see these faces of these glum people sitting in there, and it was about 10 o'clock in the morning, and they had beers. And the limousine was huge, and it filled up sideways about the 4 parking places in front of that window. And I jumped out and said, I'll go in there and get my coffee. And so I went in, and every eye, there were 12 people in there, every eye just flashed. Say something to each other. It was a very young woman, maybe 17, behind the counter. And she said, can I help you? And I said, I'd like half decaf, half real, or whatever it is I ordered. And she didn't move. She just kept standing. And she looked at me and looked at the limousine, looked at me, looked at the limousine. The big window was right there. And she said, all right, who are you? And I didn't know what to say, so I was smart aleck. And I said, I'm an aging rock star. She didn't smile, and nobody in the whole room laughed. And she said, well, who were you? I have one other limousine story, because they came at me together. There's a marvelous young man named Ken Burns. And this is a plug, I guess. I didn't mean for it to be. Ken Burns has just finished the most ambitious project that PBS has ever undertaken. That's a broad statement. PBS has undertaken to photograph a lot of birds and strange little animals in a lot of strange little places. But Ken Burns, next fall, will put onto PBS 11 hours of the Civil War. And without one actor in sight, all documentary, all using his marvelous film photography, the archives of every state, the Confederacy, the Union, and all you hear are voices of Lincoln and Lee, etc. I'm the voice of a Tennessee mountain sergeant who fought in 13 battles. But, I mean, we're not fooling with just my kind of amateurism. We're talking Jason Robards, Sam Waterston, Garrison Keillor playing 5 Middle Western parts. I don't know why they said that. In any case, this thing will run 5 nights, and it'll be what's on PBS. It'll run from Sunday through Thursday, and then the Civil War will end in time for Washington Week on Friday night. But it'll be the first time PBS ever done this. And the 7 or 9 historians, and they're the 7 or 9 you would have heard of in the Civil War, all gathered with Ken's staff to screen it for the first time. And he invited me to come watch. And so I was going to New York. Now I'm to my limousine. I'm at LaGuardia Airport. It's early in the morning. I'm headed to 44th, 45th Street. I hadn't been at LaGuardia in years. If you have, you know that when you get off the plane, there's a long line there, and it's a taxi cab line, people in line for taxi cabs, and it reaches as far as the eye can see. And I thought, I'm going to be late, and this is awful. Well, there was the inevitable man beside me, very well. And he said, aren't you Charley Cordry from Washington Week? That's what they all say. I usually say yes. And Cordry says he's me, and we go on. But we are these 2 old guys. But this man said, you're Cordry from Washington Week. I said, no, I'm McDowell. He said, of course you are. You're from Richmond. glad to see you. Why are you standing in this line? And I said, in order to get that cat. And he said, well, if we share a limo, we can just walk over to that other place and wave and one will come. And I said, I don't know. I was thinking about money. I thought it cost $100. Or I didn't know what it cost. He said, I'll take care of it. And he introduced himself, and he was the chief executive officer of a pretty big company in America. And so I agreed we'd ride in his limo. And we summoned the limo, and it came, and it was long and black. And it had a sign in the window that said, Mel's Limo. And I liked it from that moment. It was very fancy, but it was informal in its ownership. And Mel was a guy from, he later told me, Brooklyn. Shrewd looking and funny and my age. And he loaded us in. And we then drove the great chief executive to his meeting on 36th Street. And that chief executive talked from the airport to 36th Street. And it was all about Washington Week in Review. And he said, now I want to ask you, is Hedrick Smith the smartest person you have ever known? And I said, well, one of the two, maybe one of the three. And I'd give these little short answers, and he'd interrupt and say, well, here's why I think he's the most sensational person on the television stage. And now he said, I want to tell you about Haynes Johnson. And he told me about Haynes Johnson. Why? And was he right? And I'd say, yeah. And he talked. He went through everybody. He went through the line. He said that Duke was the most impartial, apolitical man in this hemisphere, which is not exactly true. But it went on like that through everybody. Covered 11 or 12 people that were on Washington Week. He finally got out. We shook hands. He gave me his card, which I still got. And, now Mel was to drive me up. And Mel drove very slowly up 46th Street. And he said, yeah, that's pretty talky guy, wasn't he? I said, yeah. Mel said, I didn't agree with about half of what he said. And I said, do you know anything about the program, Mel? He says, I watched it since Peter listened to it. Well, that's the secret word. That means since it started. Mel said, I've always watched it. And I think it's marvelous, but I don't agree with him about half of it. But Mel said, did you notice a very specific omission in that man's talk? And I said, no. Mel said, he never mentioned you in any way. And I said, I hadn't thought of that, Mel. And I felt bad, and Mel could tell I felt bad. She's looking in the rearview mirror. And I was wearing that. Limo driver's looking in the rearview. Mel said, well, I'm going to tell you something to make you feel better off. And I said, what is it, Mel? He says, you're my favorite one on Washington. I said, Mel, that is the kindest thought. What makes you say that? And then Mel said, because you're the only one that ain't any smarter than I am. And he was real, and he was true. Now, I put it off. I put off all I can. I've used up 15 minutes. And I'll try to talk a little bit about what it is about Washington. And I'm not going to be original. I'm going to talk about George Bush. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about what I conceive to be the state of the country. Which you're entitled to do when you have this stuff that you don't necessarily bring any expertise to. First, George Bush. The important thing about George Bush that will distinguish him in short-term history, certainly, is that he's not Ronald Reagan. And we could go on with that both ways for a long time, but he's not Ronald Reagan. George Bush is what Ronald Reagan ran against in many ways. He is the Washington establishment. And I don't think we're ever going to understand him until we try to accept that along with Willie Horton and noble qualities and less noble qualities. I think we've got to face that George Bush is probably the establishment figure in that city. He's been there since he was a middle small boy. He's held principal jobs in the government, about 9 of them, that he claims a lot of home states, but Washington, D.C. is George Bush's home, and he is a person of Washington. And with that comes an immense kind of tolerance. With it comes a sort of acceptance of government's problems and not necessarily any feeling you got to do something about them. With it comes a very good feeling about Democrats. People that have lived in Washington a long time and are as smart as George Bush are superficially partisan and deeper down part of a brotherhood, sisterhood that is the political establishment. He is very well liked personally, and I think that's important because he gets forgiven a lot for that, and it also gives him opportunities. He's especially well liked. I know from first-hand experience at large events where I was talking to him more than once that the leader of the Senate, Senator Mitchell, a Democrat, leader of the House, a Democrat, Mr. Foley, both happen to be particularly fond of George Bush and very good friends of George Bush. This is not the Reagan administration, where Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan tried to get along and couldn't, where suspicion runs back and forth. Most of the members of the House of Representatives have been guests in the White House with George Bush, and not downstairs, upstairs, all over the family quarters, in the Lincoln bedroom with the dog. This is a very friendly man who is very well regarded personally, and somehow that matters. He's also a very knowledgeable man. He knows the details about this government. Now, how does he work? It's a cliche that everybody already knows. He's a reactive person. He is not a conceptual person. Conceptual conversation makes him uneasy. He wants to hear what the 2 or 3 sides are and try to calculate a way to put as many of them together and get on with it as he can. He hates conceptual stuff. The thing that really makes him the drollest and the saddest is talking about the vision thing and saying you don't have any vision. What he really confesses is that doesn't interest him very much. He's very cautious. It's presumptuous, but my notion would be that he thinks it's his job to keep the store going good. He thinks it's a successful store, not change its policies much, run the store, and turn it over in good shape to the next person that's going to run the store. That's up to everybody to decide whether they think this is a time in world history for that attitude, but that's my feeling about his attitude. He's very much involved in the government. Mr. Reagan was not very much involved in the government. Mr. Reagan had about 9 things he believed. He made that incredibly clear to everybody, and then sort of was available, kind of there. And if any of his 9 things weren't being bucked up, he'd say, whatever happened to, why aren't we making another speech about whatever? He worked off 4x5 cards. He was funny when he didn't have the 4x5 card, but he wasn't very well informed when he didn't have the 4x5 card. His instincts were still whatever they were, which I think were mostly good, but he wasn't much involved in the government of the United States, except as a symbol, figurehead, whatever. George Bush is up to his neck in it, 16 hours a day. He works with advisors all day. His idea of a meeting is to get, say, 4 cabinet members and their principal assistants to discuss a specific issue. After they've talked a minute, he'll interrupt and say, now it's very obvious to me, you over there think we ought to go at it this way. You over there think you ought to go at it this way. You've got 5 minutes, you've got 5 minutes, let's hear the 2 sides. They debate in front of him, and he doesn't pick a winner. He picks a place between them to compromise the difference. Of course, that's a generalization, and of course it's overstated, but that is generally the approach of George Bush. He almost always compromises between whatever the 2 extremes are among his advisors. He listens to advisors. They have tremendous influence on him. He listens to John Sununu, and he listens to Mr. Riley at EPA, and he somehow compromises a guy who's skeptical of the whole environmental movement, Sununu, and a guy who came out of the environmental movement and was one of his truly brilliant appointments to reach over into what Reagan considered the enemy and put the guy in charge of the Environmental Protection Agency. Bush lets those 2 go at each other and picks positions between their positions. He consults with Congress more than any president well, I don't know, since in my time. It is nothing for the Democratic leaders, let alone the Republican leaders, to get calls from George Bush at breakfast. And often to talk about last night's basketball game, something they saw on television, and on into, now about this bill, surely we can do so-and-so with this bill. He consults very much, and whatever we hear about, he's declared a new war on the Democrats. 3 days later, he's talking to Foley again, saying we disagree, but how can we get at it? Now, the public reaction to George Bush. He has higher polls than Reagan did, except for one little brief period. Bush is one of the most popular presidents since the invention of polling. There's a difference, though. If a smart aleck columnist from Richmond wrote harshly of Mr. Reagan or made fun of Mr. Reagan, the smart aleck columnist got a lot of letters and some mean phone calls saying, leave that old man alone, you leftist, Democratic devil. You can say anything you want to about George Bush and nobody objects. Yes, popular, but no, not defended as any kind of deity. Laughed at a little, chuckled at, comfortably by people. I don't know what that means, but I think it means something. The polls show he's very popular, and the same polls show that the people want a whole lot of things done that George Bush is not inclined to do. And the people with whom he's popular see no contradiction in liking him a lot and wishing he'd do more. They're just all over the United States. And I go around and make talks like this, a lot of places do, the Washington Weekly. And it's just amazing the number of people who are all for George Bush and wish he would do the following 9 things that he isn't doing. That's interesting to me. People want more done, polls show, and the polls show even more strongly do not want to pay for it. It's our mode at this time in this country. The cliche in Washington is that Bush's popularity is a mile wide and an inch deep. That's crude, but I think it comes close. People like Lee Atwater, who apparently is, if you heard the news tonight, going to recover from a benign tumor that caused him to faint last night, or this morning. Lee Atwater, I think, agrees with this, that George Bush is, though very popular and very competent, not in a position to withstand a serious reversal, that he would be very much threatened by an economic decline or anything along that order that seemed like a reversal to this country. Many Republicans, big shot Republicans, are concerned enough about Bush's vulnerability that they are very seriously questioning whether he can carry the Dan Quayle burden in 1992. And if I were going to make a prediction that if I'm right, I'd just be wonderful, and if I'm wrong, no one would remember. I think there will be a serious effort to replace Dan Quayle. And my hunch would be Bush would go along with it in the end. Dan Quayle has become a person who on television causes the American people to laugh and feel uneasy. Whether that's fair or not is for everybody else to judge, I suppose. But he's now so consumed with his own unpopularity that he doesn't even act natural in his own way. So what we're supposed to bet is that Jim Baker, the Secretary of State, would just wind up as the vice presidential candidate on the Bush ticket in 92. Now, leaving you with that and wishing someone would ask me about it afterwards and let me say, no, I don't really believe that. Because I do. Well, let me talk for a minute, because I'm at home in a way. Let me talk for a minute about some stuff that's on my mind. And that's the United States that Bush took over. And I'm not saying that Ronald Reagan created this United States that Bush took over. I'm just talking about what Bush found there when he came to work. And I submit that there's random evidence across a huge swath of decline in this country, and decline in our vitality, economic, industrial, intellectual, all kinds of things. That this decline comes with a really sad irony at a time where our basic principles and truths over a 200-year period are prevailing in the world as they never have before. At the time where we should be somehow celebrating what Jefferson and Mason and Madison and all of them gave to the world, we're losing touch with some of our best success. Gary Wills, who's a conservative person, not George Will, who's a conservative person but doesn't like Bush. Gary Wills is a conservative philosophical person who does kind of like Bush, but says America today is behaving as a frightened empire, hiding its problems from itself. And I think that's an exaggeration, but not too much of one. Let me just go through some stuff I found in about 3 places. 10 years ago, this was the leading creditor nation in the world. People owed us money. We supported other people. Today, it's the leading debtor nation in the world. Our industrial edge is being lost at a rate that you can watch almost from month to month, let alone year to year. Now, the Wall Street Journal said editorially the other day, when the Wall Street Journal says something editorially, man, it's coming from a very conservative place. So the Japanese are steadily taking over the United States automobile industry. They don't mean they're outselling us with cars. They mean they're taking over the United States automobile industry. We're closing factories and they're opening factories and they're building their cars in our country, and their cars are better than our cars in many, many ways. And as American plants close, the Japanese open plants. In Tennessee, in Iowa, it's not the reigning old country. We're still a healthy country with immense productivity, but we're beginning to see that there's real action in the world. Japanese filed more patents in the United States Patent Office in 1988 than Americans did. That's our patent office. They filed more patents than we did. Our educational achievement scores in math and science are at or very near the bottom of the whole industrial world. Okay, answer. But we educate everybody. We do this. We try to do things other countries don't have to do. We have a disparate population. It turns out to still be true if you take educational achievement scores at the upper high school, prep school level. It turns out to still be true if you pit our prep schools against somebody else's prep schools. In math and science, we are way down. And in other subjects, we're not so far up. No other industrial country, none in Europe, has the percentage of its population uncovered by health insurance that we do. We have more people that aren't covered for health insurance than our brother democracies. Our infant mortality rate in America is so high that in the United States, our infant mortality rate is so high that it's out of the league of other industrial democracies, and it lands down around emerging third world countries. Infant mortality. 1 in 4 children in America is born into poverty. 45% of black children are born into poverty. The poorest fifth of our population, receives 5.3% of the income of our country. The highest fifth receives 40% of the income. The gap between rich and poor is not parallel in other industrial democracies. In the last decade, almost the last decade, 8 years back, among families with children, in the lower fifth, in this lower fifth of our population, if you take families with children, their income in 8 years went down 14%. The highest fifth of our population in income went up 19% at the same time. If you take families headed by one parent, usually a woman, that income went down 20%. That's what was available through government grants, aid, jobs, everything. The rich-poor division in this country becomes almost unbelievable. So meanwhile, we have these strictures of the federal deficit, and we're handling them in a remarkably cooperative way between the Republicans and Democrats. We are faking the public about the deficit, sitting down and working out how to fake it. And Mr. Darman, who's brilliant, and George Bush's people decide how they're going to fake the budget figures, overemphasize what's coming in, de-emphasize what's going out, take the expensive stuff out of the budget that we understand, and the Democrats in the end cooperate right along. We're being deceived about how serious our own federal deficit problem is, and deceived about where the money goes and where it comes from. Meanwhile, just pointing out some problems. We don't have any money in the federal budget for the very things George Bush wants to do or says he does. And yet we recently found that the Internal Revenue Service failed to collect last year $60 billion that were owed to the government, and the government knew where the money was and didn't collect it because in many cases the statute of limitations ran out before they had enough staff to examine those cases. There's an underground economy that allegedly owes us 60 to 100 billion a year that we can't even find, drugs and so forth. But these are $60 billion that we knew were owed and didn't have enough agents, didn't have a sufficient computer system to even go get the money. It's appalling when you start hearing the Star-Spangled Banner and feeling great about the country that we've let the IRS's computer system get so old that it can't collect the taxes. During Reagan's period, we reduced the staff per job to be done. And we saved some money. We might have saved $10 million. We just lost $60 billion for it. It goes on and on. The tax system becomes increasingly regressive. 3/4 of Americans now pay more money to the government in Social Security taxes than they pay in income taxes. 3/4 of us pay more in Social Security than income. Social Security taxes are quite regressive. Everybody pays the same to a level. Everybody doesn't exactly get the same return. It gets a little more progressive once you get to be 65, but not much. Social Security continues to go up. That means 3/4 of Americans are paying more and more taxes. We've lowered the income tax rates for the rich, the moderately rich. It's a perfect example of progressive taxation in a country that made ability to pay its principle for so long. Now we're talking about capital gains tax reductions. That might help the economy. I don't know. It's just one more regressive step. If that woman living with those 3 little kids, making 19% less last year than this, is not in the capital gains business. Now, if the capital gains helps us invest, that causes somebody to build a plant, and they get a child care center, and she can go to work there. Maybe it'll help her in the end, but we went all through this with the Reagan tax reductions, and it makes my head hurt to go through it again. Now, let me end my great denunciation here, and I'm sorry for it. We're the most violent, crime-ridden, drug-plagued nation in the world, and probably in the history of the world. We have 5% of the world's population, and we use 50% of the world's cocaine. 50% of the world's cocaine. And much more than half of that cocaine is used by white people, not in central cities, and much of it is used by white people in nice suburban areas. The market is not the people of the central cities. Those are the sellers. Americans are using drugs right across the spectrum of colors and income. But one of the worst elements of the drug problem that the drug czar never talks about is tremendous use of drugs in rural America. We don't hear much about that because there are no shootings in the street. drugs are being sold there and the drugs are being used there, just like the housing crisis. We think of the homeless and we feel however we feel about the homeless. Way over 2/3 of the homeless are in rural America, living in national parks in tents, no beat-up trailers and things. Families, they're not these sad souls that we see on city streets. In any case, that's sort of the America that George Bush inherited. Now, he acknowledged a lot of those problems. I'm going to race through the last part of this. I've done the sad part so much it's depressing. Bush does acknowledge a lot of these problems. Reagan never acknowledged it one. Democrats are scared to emphasize them even now. They're so snake-bit. Bush acknowledges the problems, and I hope history records that he's broken with Reagan in acknowledging those problems. Bush has talked about the environment and child care and health care and drugs and the environment. All except drugs are new. Reagan didn't acknowledge any of those problems. So Bush does acknowledge them and emphasizes them. They're the right things to emphasize, it seems to me, if anyone cares. But there's no money when he finishes emphasizing. The increases that Bush has recommended and been able to find any hope for in the budget barely keep up with the growth of our population and the growth of the problems. Rarely keeps up with the growth of the problems. The deficit makes the spending impossible. The strain and the resistance to taxes are not just something about the federal government either. It's spreading through states, localities. There's a tax revolt in this country, and the no new taxes theme on which George Bush ran is now what mayors are running on. It's what Governor Wilder is saying will be his basic keystone: no new taxes. And it's spreading through the country. I have written down here that what Bush is dealing in mostly is unfunded rhetoric. And I think that that's fair and that's right. The lack of funds goes beyond educational, health care, child care, drugs, and environment, and those things he talks about. We don't have the money to really consider the option of giving significant aid to the new democracies in Europe. What we've been able to squeeze out from Poland is fairly typical. Millions, not a billion. Not this. More and more new democracies. Add Nicaragua. We don't have any money. Highway system, bridge system, what they call the infrastructure, whatever in the world that means, is 50 to 100 billion in the soup. Way behind. We're not even going to raise the gas tax. No new taxes. And when cars start falling in potholes on the interstate, which they have started doing, you would think that would affect people, and they say no new taxes. We have a vast drug program which is concentrated tremendously on prisons, on enforcement. If you are a drug user and due to an arrest or due to talking with your minister or due to pure good luck, you would like to turn yourself over to treatment, in most American cities they say, we'll put you on the waiting list. 6 months in some cities. We're a great country. Is that how we want to do that? And it goes on. The S&L bailout, is that going to be $2 billion? Sounds more like 3. And the other day, a very good estimator from Wall Street said it'll be $500 billion over the next 10 to 15. The federal government itself has about a $100 billion problem of toxic nuclear waste around its own nuclear bomb factories. And we don't have that on the budget, but we got to worry about it. We don't have the S&L bailout on the budget. We don't have the sacking of HUD by private industry on there. There's a lot to do. The Democrats are paralyzed by fear of being identified with taxes. They're also paralyzed by the public fear of the Democrats' own constituencies. And the Democrats don't know where to go, and certain of its candidates turn off 4/5 of the American people, and yet are crucial represent crucial constituencies. Kevin Phillips, who's a conservative Republican commentator, and over the last 15 years, best record of understanding American politics of anybody writing today. I say it's a broad statement. But he had Reagan winning dead right. He had the Reagan administration failure dead right. He had everything. He's had everything dead right. His prediction is, his thing now is not a prediction, it's just a statement. He says both American parties are brain dead. And it comes close to being true. A certain amount of the paralysis we feel is built into the new mode of government in America, which is divided government. Republican president, Democratic Congress. This great new change in American politics has occurred quietly, while most of us didn't pay much attention. The Republicans have won 5 of the last 6 presidential elections, are on their way to 6 of the last 7, and for all I know, 8 and 9 and so. The Democrats, meanwhile, have controlled the House of Representatives for 36 years, and I would predict will control it for 5, 10 more. And the Democrats mostly control the Senate. Half the members of the House of Representatives that are Democrats, I mean, Democrats are way over half of the House. They have a huge majority there. Half of all Democrats were elected in districts carried by George Bush. The American people like divided government. They love it. There's a poll out finally that proved that. I think a lot of us had really known that. People were asked, do you positively prefer a president of one party and Congress of another? 63% of the American people said yes, they like it. You have the best of all worlds that way, us voters. Democrats mostly speak up for our conscience about the poor, and they say we got to do more, and we nod, and on polls we say way over 50%. Yes, we got to do more for the poor and the homeless and little kids, and the Head Start program, which was a raging success, and now 2 out of 5, with Bush adding some money to it, 2 out of 5 kids qualified for Head Start will be able to go to it. It's a program that really works, apparently, in getting kids ready to go to school and absorb something. Democrats talk about that. That pleases people. It doesn't displease people. They vote for those Democrats for Congress. Democrats edge the spending up a little bit. You know, add 0.8% to a Bush recommendation. And everyone says, that's it. That's good. I'm glad they did that. That's good. Democrats look out for the district. Democrats really are concerned about a business that's in trouble, about an army camp that might be moved. Democrats look out for the district. And Republican presidents protect us against taxes. And the way I have finally decided to phrase that is Democrats get you stuff, and Republicans see that you don't have to pay for it. And the Democrats don't get us very much stuff. I think we really come to believe in this country that we don't have to pay for it, and that we shouldn't pay for it. We want it, and that's good. We can go to church and feel good about it. We want to help these people and help our country and improve our education, but we don't have to pay for it. If those darn politicians would quit wasting the money on a raise for themselves or some charade, then we wouldn't have to raise taxes. The sense of proportion about that is so preposterous. I have met people who actually think that Congress wouldn't give itself a raise. We could do something about the Head Start program or something. We're talking a few million versus billions. I mean, it's nickels versus tens of $1,000 bills stacked as high as you can see. What money is there in the budget to do all this? Waste in government, my experience is, runs just about a steady percentage of whatever the money's being spent for. And I think there's less waste than there was 10 years ago, and a lot less than there was 20, and a great deal less than there was 30. But right now, defense takes 28% of the budget. And with a big cut to provide a peace dividend, the 28 will become 26.5 or 27. It takes a long time to change defense. So moving all the troops back costs an immense amount. but run this math in your head. Defense takes 28% of the whole budget. Entitlements, Social Security, all the retirement programs, all that stuff we believe is holy, takes 47%. Add 47% for entitlement, 28% for defense, you get 75% of the budget is in those two noble places. And 14% of the budget, and the fastest rising item in it, is interest on the national debt. So we got to add that, and I think we get 89%. All gone, dedicated, holy money, leaving 11% of the budget for the whole rest of the United States government. People don't have a sense of proportion. Everything from the national parks, the Commerce Department, the space program, the whole thing, everything you have to do with government, the IRS, and then can't hire any staff, et cetera, comes out of 11% of the budget. Ronald Reagan did something. God, I've talked forever. Ronald Reagan decided whether people thought it could pass or not, that he and his very conservative advisors would pick some programs that could simply be eliminated in America and make some money available. And they finally made a list of 82 domestic programs that they recommended be scratched, abandoned, forgotten. Some of them dated back to Lyndon Johnson, Truman, Roosevelt, Nixon. Okay, so they did 82 of them. The Congress, incidentally, did not agree to kill a single one of those. The 82 are still there. But if they killed all 82, some smart aleck at the budget office added them up to see what would have happened. Killed 82 programs that would have touched every American. We would have saved $2.5 billion. $2.5 billion will buy 4 stealth bombers and a little piece of a fifth. It isn't any money. The farm program costs 25, 30, 40 billion a year. We were going to save 2.5, eliminate. There's got to be some sense of proportion in how we look at it. The peace dividend will be forever. There will be a peace dividend because we just don't have the evil empire to stand against. And we'll be careful about it. We'll be safe for 5, 10 years, kind of phasing down the military. We're not going to need all that military, and everybody knows that. And there will be some money available. But what's piled up there, waiting for that money, just swamps it. Housing, drug treatment, Head Start, infrastructure, the environment, the nuclear cleanup, the bailouts, and here I am right back where I started the sad part of the speech at the top. The demands are so vast that if we wait, we're going to wade through our lifetimes into another. So I apologize for having been so dismal. I want to end on a note from Ronald Reagan because he was a joy somehow to me. I don't know how. I didn't agree with very much of what he did, but he had a sense, a wily, funny sense of humor. He spoke at the Alfalfa Club in Washington in about the 3rd year of his hugely successful, popular first presidential term. And it was the Alfalfa Club's the military-industrial complex and a few newspaper publishers. And they gather in this room and they eat a real fancy meal, and the president and the cabinet and Supreme Court all come. And Reagan was speaking, and no matter what he said, this place just erupted with cheers. They just cheered everything. And they were particularly pleased with the tax cut. Oh, they were pleased. No matter what he said about that, they just stomped their feet. And finally, they got too much for Ronald Reagan. It was fun to watch. He said, wait a minute now. We can have problems with all of this. He then said, I don't know if all that new tax payment's going to come in just because we lowered it. I'm not sure. I think it will. Well, they just didn't know what gone on with the old man. And they were sad. And he sensed they were too sad. And he said, now wait a minute, I didn't mean to depress you. I'm telling you, we got problems, but they're none we can't overcome. But we do have problems. Now he said, I particularly am confident I can overcome them because I already know how, as a Californian, to overcome the largest problem that there's ever been. Pause, he knew how to pause. He said the largest problem there's ever been is how to catch a porcupine. I mean, there it is, all sparkly, and you can't grab it, it's against the law to shoot it, and there it is, and you've got to do something with it. And he said in California we have evolved a way to do it, and I'm very good at it. I'm quite good at it. Is you take a tub and you throw it over the porcupine. Upside down over the porcupine. And that gives you some place to sit down while you figure out what in the hell to do next. Thank you all. I'm sorry I talked so
long. Thank you, Charles. I said before, if anybody had any questions, fire Ray McDowell. I was in the newspaper business of reasons. This will ornery and ask so many difficult questions that they have to accept difficult questions. So do.
You're supposed to ask, who's going to run on which ticket and what year? Yes, sir. Yep. Yep. I don't know.
What's the question?
Oh, I'm sorry. The question is, if a very high percentage of drugs are not used by desolate people in Jackson Ward, as he put it, but are used by people out in the suburban community and all through the community, who's supposed to reform them? The church, the government, the who? I don't know. I think we're supposed to arrest drug users at some point. And I think it sounds marvelous to be concentrating on drug dealers and big shippers and all those noble things. We've concentrated on that for a couple of years, and we find we've had more drugs shipped into the United States in the past year than in any prior 2 years, almost. I should think we'd want to start enforcing the drug laws against ordinary, mortal, stereotypical white people who buy drugs. And in some few communities that is being done, and their cars are being confiscated at the site of where they pulled into the Jackson wards of this world. They're arresting the people, confiscating their cars, and going ahead with the kind of law enforcement that I find impressive. I'm much more interested in trying to deal with drugs at the treatment level, at the education level, and I'm afraid I think that hopeless drug use is a symptom of despair, and I would like to be seeing things done that begin to try to make jobs available, improve education in the worst drug areas, etc. I don't think it's simple. No, it does not. Well, there is a level of sophistication and community position at which an arrest and 10 days in jail works wonders. Just works wonders. We've learned that 10 days or 30 days or 30 years in jail doesn't work very many wonders among people who have nothing to live for and are ignorant and despair anyway. But yes, some selective arrests among those of us with neckties, suits as they call them down there. Arrest some suits, and you'll sober a few people. Well, I'm not an expert on that. I didn't give you a very good answer. Yes, sir?
Is Official Washington just as excited about German reunification as Secretary Baker indicates? Is there a fear about the unified Germany?
There's a tremendous wariness about a reunified Germany, and Washington seems to accept that there's no way out of it. And it's probably better than it is bad, but the generation that is in charge of our government is wary of Germany and its history. The Poles are 7 times as wary of the German republics and their history. We're going to go forward pretty obviously in encouraging that union, and I don't I mean, if I had an answer, I'd give it to you. There is great wariness. I haven't been to a lunch in the press club or to somebody's house for 3 months that before the evening was over, very serious reservations about what will we do weren't being discussed. I think human psychology is such that would be inevitable whether the threat is great or not. But that's closest I can come. Yes?
If our country continues to deny Republican health and has momentum and keeps going ahead, and not doing anything about them, what is your picture of our country say, oh, 10 years down the road?
Don't know. I could get fanciful and do that. I didn't have any idea 10 years ago that I would stand up here with prepared notes and list the picture of our country today on the pessimistic side that I did. So I wouldn't like to think 10 more years. There's so much can intervene. We're the longest period, without a recession, a true recession in modern times. That can happen to us. I think I also ought to say, not that I know much about it, but that there are tremendous things to be enthusiastic about. We worry about the Japanese and the West Germans and all that. We're still more resourceful than they are across the board, industrially. We still have a more varied economy that thrives from the farm to somewhere else, and we're losing an automobile war here and a high-tech war there and a computer war there. We're losing more and more of them. But all in all, though their economies are growing faster than ours, we're still way out ahead of them. I think there's time to fix it, time to sober up a little bit, time to do some things that don't have to be drastic. I bet if we got together in this room tonight in 12 workshops and brought together our little plans and had a midnight deadline, we wouldn't have a vast tax increase in America. I bet we'd raise gasoline taxes. I bet we'd find some other special taxes. I bet we'd fudge the top rate a little bit. I bet we'd do some things, probably with Social Security and others, that would get this deficit out of our way in the next 2 or 3 years, which we're not doing. I don't think it's all that bleak. I think it's time for us to hit ourselves upside the head and say, hey, we got to do something and quit just playing this children's game of saying we ought to do all these things, but the politicians ought to do it instead of wasting the money, and we don't have to raise taxes. I would love to hear 10 Americans walk forward and say, I hereby volunteer to pay some taxes, more taxes. I think it would clear the air to the degree you might not have to raise them very much. We could just get in some positive mood that we're willing to make some sacrifice for things that matter. I'm preaching now, and you're supposed to quit when you do that. Yes, ma'am. Pardon? Yes, ma'am. Mm-hmm. Well, you won't find any one villain. There were a great many people with investment urge who saw to that. Well, the two strongest, I'll try to answer in my limited knowledge. The two most powerful industrial countries in the world next to us are West Germany and Japan. We beat them in a war, we will recall. They have had no defense obligations since that time. They're tremendously bright, cultured, surging countries, and spared the huge, incredible burden of defense. They have had a 40-year period to develop their industrial potential, and that's a very superficial answer, but that's the basic one. We have provided the military troops on the ground in Germany. We provided the fleet on the water around Japan. We are their defense. We have been everybody's defense. We're at $300 billion a year now on that pursuit. And we're headed, if you would listen to Mr. Reagan, into Star Wars, which will carry us another generation into 300 and 400 billion, but that's another argument. Increasing. I saw a thing the other day that said only 20% of Americans thought he was great. But 65% of Americans thought he was great till the day he left. I'm not sure which is right. You know, I don't understand it anymore. No, he doesn't. Yes.
Is it possible, how could it be done, to get around the image business to try to force some of these issues? More candidates, so that they will address it, tell us what they really plan to do if they're away from what we do.
Wouldn't that be marvelous? Yeah, that'd be marvelous. My answer is again superficial and partial. I would start by federalizing congressional elections, as we have federalized the presidential election. Federalized being the word that means we taxpayers pay for the campaign. And thus we set limits on expenditures. I would tighten the presidential one tremendously, the so-called soft money that goes to states. I would virtually rule out. Really make the candidates run within the limitations set down. We run into a First Amendment problem here and there, and I am not allowed to take that lightly. But some sort of campaign control that shortens the campaigns, limits the money. The networks wouldn't have to be pressured but a week to say they'd give a half hour for true debates at frequent intervals, get the press out of the debates, and have a central person who simply changes the subject and keeps the clock and insists the candidates debate. Somehow wish there could be a breakthrough that says reasonable and honorable and decent Americans should not be forgiven for vicious, low-down attacks on one another. And they just shouldn't be forgiven. And I'm changing. Yes, in the back.
Do you feel that limiting the number of terms for senators and congressmen might help in that regard?
I see a poll that says, the question is, do you think, well, you all heard it, I'm farther from you than you are. 70% of the American people allegedly believe, according to a new poll, that limiting the terms would somehow help. I can't see it at all. I had a man in my office the other day, all the way from Iowa, which produces marvelous politicians, by the way, who really cares more about this term limitation. We're going to hold the House to 5 2s or 10, 6 2s 12 years. We're going to hold the Senate to 2 6-year terms. Then they're gone, man. You close it right off. This man is a decent Iowa person with a tremendous following, thinks Iowa will petition this constitutional amendment any day it wants to. They're really convinced. I've read persuasive people that I admire very much, who believe that is the answer to a lot of problems. To me, it's backwards, utterly backwards. The most serious and productive and important politicians I've ever seen were the truly experienced ones. I'm sorry that's what I think. I love to see some old conservative Virginians the day Harry Byrd Sr.'s term was up. You know, go, man, Mr. Booth will take that now, or Mr. So-and-so, yeah. I like veteran politicians. I go to a day, 1964, when Lyndon Johnson would have already finished his terms, he'd be gone. Everett Dirksen would have finished his, and he'd been gone. There's the Republican leader and the Democratic leader of the United States Senate. Both of them of tarnished image. Both of them marvelous public servants. Brilliant. And they met in each other's office about 3 days, in which they always said the same thing: we got to do something about this civil rights thing. And the third time they met, Johnson said, Ed, where are you going to be when the session's over? And Dirksen said, in my office. And Johnson said, order some bourbon. I'll be there. And bring that young aide of yours named Brown, and Lyndon brought his. They sat down and wrote the Civil Rights Bill. Those two old men with their bourbon. And then, of course, thousands of lawyers came forward to rephrase and do it. But that's when it got done. And it passed the Senate, and it passed the House, and finally saved this country, finally ended the Civil War. Because two old veteran politicians, they are the ones that can put partisanship aside. They are the ones that understand how to do it. I pompously say, I'll stand with Jefferson. He said, let's re-elect them every 2 years in the House. Let people throw them out anytime they want to. It's important. Let's have some in the Senate that get to stay there so they're not frightened all the time. And then they have to come up. I thought Jefferson had it pretty good. What is this sudden thing that we don't trust the people to decide? We have some artificial rule that jerks them out of there? I find it incomprehensible, and I say again, it's a wave that's moving, and some very admirable people believe in it. I don't believe we're in that much trouble that we have to do anything that backward. But I don't know. I think I've talked far too long, and I thank you, and thank you for letting me come.
Thank you, Charles. We're going to have some goodies in the back of the room. I bet you a good University of Richmond. Thanks again. Thank you all.